So there have been a number of tribes who have participated in those settlements that are still yet to determine what they're going to do, and many of them have per capita, 50%, 80%, and so individuals are receiving windfalls. They're receiving lots of money right now, and these kind of scammers and fraudsters are all over Indian country. We know we've been assisting the Cobell plaintiffs in the distribution of some of those funds, and every now and then we get a new scam like that, like Sean just described, that comes into our office. People will be using 1-800 numbers that are very similar to the claims administrator's numbers, or our number, even our trust beneficiary call center number, and then fortunately somebody brings it to our attention and we can track it down. So be very cautious about that. Before we go, I wanted to make sure that Brian Ross, who's the Office of Special Trustees Financial Education Director, that I pointed him out. Brian's back there in the back of the room. Brian, if you can stand up, wave your hand. And then just open it up for questions. Before I do, one of the things that Brian is working on right now, and we'll certainly let everybody know when we have this closer to finalization, is a one-day comprehensive Native youth financial education conference. We're hoping to do it in partnership with one of the pueblos in New Mexico, or someplace in New Mexico. I think Sean and First Nations and maybe others will be involved in that as well. So we'll let you know about that, and we hope that you'll be able to participate and help us with that. And then finally, also, just remember, through your trust officers, through Brian, through the regional trust administrators, through Sean, through myself, we can bring this stuff to your communities. And it's very valuable information, we think, and we'll be happy to work with you on accessing it. So let me just open it up. Right. Let me open it up for questions for any of the participants here, and then we can. I'll turn it over to Mary so she can close it out. Any questions for Vince or Sean or Vince?
Thank you, Brian. I'm wondering if you could describe the differences of standards between the broker-dealer and the investment advisor. That'd be very helpful, because it wasn't in the information there. Because I think most of the tribes, you might meet a broker-dealer or you might meet an investment advisor, and you don't know they actually operate in two different worlds.
Thank you very much. To put it very simply, the difference between a broker-dealer and an investment advisor is a broker-dealer serves as sort of a clearinghouse where securities are purchased and then transferred to the buyer and seller. So a broker-dealer, I don't think I'm going to be breaking any rules, just to name one that you probably have heard of. Merrill Lynch would be a broker-dealer. Now, an investment advisor is a specific individual or firm that is tasked with providing a fiduciary standard to you, the customer. Now, fiduciary standard, same as what we provide at OST, is to place the interest of the customer above anyone else's. In other words, to jealously guard and protect the interest of the beneficiary or the client. And so that's what an investment advisor function is to watch out for your best interest. Whereas a broker-dealer has some of the same types of licenses that are required in securities, they really aren't necessarily held to the same standard as the fiduciary. So just know that if you're working with someone on an individual level or on an institutional level, organizational level, Someone that has a fiduciary responsibility to you has a higher standard of care. Does that go to address that? Thank you very much.
Anybody else? Questions? Comments?
I was looking at that slide for the bonds. There was a really good one that you had about the, it said not for amateurs, I think, on it. And it listed some of the complexities and difficulties with bonds, and one of them was the transparency issues. Because I remember when I was younger and was first getting into like a job, and I worked at the local television station. They gave me a 401k. I'm like, what is this thing? And they're all like, well, you can invest in these bonds and different things, and this is low risk, but didn't give you any kind of information about what's in the bond or what the firm is doing with the money and where is it going, and is it a risky investment they're doing or not, and then the housing market blew up and all these 401ks started having all this crazy stuff, and I'm like, I thought this was low risk or something, and then on the other end of it, like the social responsibility thing, I ran into an issue where like, oh, I don't even know where this money's going to these other companies, and I looked at the list and I'm like, well, I didn't want my money to go to some particular companies with doing some stuff in Arizona with prisons and things, and I had no explanation on my statements I got on my paycheck. And with the other side of it, the stocks, it felt like it was way more transparent. You could, if it's just one company, you know. Is there like resources or things that could give you this that's more like a summary to where like the actual bonds go and how that works and the flow of money and how it's being used in a sense?
Yeah, so there are some websites that have, some really specific information on bonds, and there's some publications. John, do you have any specific resources for bond research that you use? Okay, yeah, so maybe share some of those. And yeah, like I mentioned, bonds are, they're not for small, individual investors. There's transparency issues, there's liquidity issues. Another issue with bonds is they're very expensive. A typical individual bond is about $5,000, and often you can't purchase bonds in lots of less than 5 units. So many times, just to get into an individual bond issue, you need minimum of $25,000, okay? So again, for most individuals starting out investing, a bond mutual fund, like I mentioned earlier, is probably, a better bet. And they do have fees involved with them, and they're not, they're probably the best way for, a smaller investor to get into the bond market.
Margaret.
I don't know who to address this to, but I'm fairly new in the water settlement negotiations, and someone did a presentation where they said the accounts for water settlements are handled by the OST. Does that apply to all the tribes once their water settlement is, once it's settled? I know they get water privileges, but I wasn't aware of them getting any revenues, or monies. But if they do, the money goes to account at the OST, or is that what I was understanding?
Well, and I'll try to answer it, and then anybody who wants to jump in can jump in. It depends. I mean, that's the clearest answer, unfortunately, because they're all unique. And so depending on what the tribe and the government and the other stakeholders negotiate for purposes of that final settlement is going to determine or dictate where those funds go. Typically, the funds can come out of Treasury and they are sent to an account at the Office of the Special Trustee, and we hold it, and we may not hold all of it. We may only hold a portion of it for purposes of later use, investment, whatever. It depends on whether it's designated as trust. In many water settlement claims, there are what are called operational maintenance, and structural types of funds that are created. Sometimes those go to BOR, the Bureau of Reclamation, because that's what they do. Sometimes they're set aside for the tribe because the tribe has the capacity to either contract that work out or has a water rights or water, development project or program that can do that. So it depends. It really depends on how it's set up and how it's negotiated. We see them all in all different versions. So we've seen them, for instance, in situations where the tribe has said, we don't want to wait. We want to put this to work right away. We're prepared to go ahead and expend the money, but we want to be reimbursed. And so we've seen those kind of reimbursement type of provisions. We've seen some where funds are set aside exclusively for access to the tribe without any holds or conditions. But I think most typically what we see is funds set aside for very specific purposes that are accessible to the tribe, either under the terms and conditions of the American Indian Trust Fund Management Reform Act withdrawal provisions, or for withdrawal and use by the tribe upon the completion of certain conditions. So it really depends. And Margaret, I don't know if you want to add to that. I know you've had a couple in your region that were recently.
What I would add to what he's saying, he's exactly right. They're very complex. They come in all different flavors. And some of them call for, like he said, things happening with the states or the cities, agreements having to be put in place, the tribe or the pueblo having to get something done. The advice I would give is stay involved. Make sure that you have the money working for you while you're waiting. And when I say working for you, earning something while it's waiting for things to happen. Because what I'm seeing as these settlements come down is things have to happen. The money's there, but it might be waiting for the state or the city or the tribe to do something. And there's varying degrees of it earns money or it doesn't, or there's this thing called indexing, which is can be complex based on what it indexes against. So my encouragement, as I said before, is understand what's happening, understand what's being proposed, and get your money to work for you while you're waiting for these things to happen. And like Jim said, it can be held in various places. There are provisions that I'm seeing in them for withdrawal under the Reform Act. There's provisions in them for just withdrawal under the Settlement Act itself. But what I would say, and my advice is, understand what is happening there, because they're very complex, and there's portions of them that trigger. And that's what I meant by know your trigger dates. Know what's happening in those, because they are very complex.
We know, for example, there's a number of Colorado River settlements that are impacting all of the tribes in the Southwest. And depending on which act or which amendment to the act, the original Central Arizona Project Act or water settlement, we will see different things. And so, yeah, Margaret's right. They're not simple. They're very complex. I know we have gone out with the Bureau of Indian Affairs and with the Bureau of Reclamation to a number of tribal communities to help either districts or tribes understand kind of the complexities there and get their input on how best to manage that in terms of the investment and how, what the need is for the future. So,
Or whether it can even invest until a certain date. And know that too. Know that about your settlement. Know when it can invest, because that's important as well.
Okay, so the tribes don't necessarily have to have their accounts handled by OST.
That would be part of whatever your negotiation was
All right.
into that legislation or settlement.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Sean, for your presentation. It was simple and I learned something. Thank you.